Hi, and welcome to week 31, if that was the week that was, with Vince McLeod of the Alternative Centre. It's been another crazy week in 2023, hasn't it, Vince?
It's been another insane week. Things are getting more and more hot all over the world in all kinds of ways. So it's interesting to talk about that. Hello, Internet, and hello, Bob.
Hey, let's jump straight into it then. Last week, Trump was indicted on 4 charges, and an article in Breitbart alleges that he could face the death penalty for conspiracy against rights as a result of a protester's death on January the 6th. How credible do you think this claim is, and do you think any prosecutor would pursue such a charge?
I don't think these claims are particularly credible at all. I think this is mostly a witch hunt that has been started by the globalists against an enemy of theirs who they perceive to be a nationalist, in other words, Donald Trump. But I don't think that's going to stop the prosecutor from pushing it through. I think they're determined to target Trump, and I think they're going to throw everything they can at him and just see if anything sticks. I don't think the death penalty is a likely outcome, but it's possible that they push the possibility of the death penalty in order to make some other punishments, such as life imprisonment, seem more reasonable. He's definitely being targeted, and we're going to have to see what they come up with.
Well, in the last decade, opposition politicians have been prosecuted or jailed on dubious or false charges in Venezuela, Russia, Turkey, Zimbabwe, Egypt, Myanmar, Belarus, Cambodia, Saudi Arabia, Uganda, and Nicaragua. Has America become a third world country in terms of its justice system, or are the charges against Trump fair and valid?
Unfortunately, I think America is becoming a third world country, and to the extent that they no longer have the trust, they no longer have the social cohesion that they used to have. That was America's great advantage. They had a large population as well as a high level of social trust, thanks to the excellent laws that have been put in place by the founding fathers, such as the Bill of Rights Act and all the freedoms that were enshrined in law. But that advantage has now been lost, I think. And in terms of trust, they've deteriorated to the level of something like Brazil. And you see in Brazil that people don't really follow the election results. People don't trust the election results. They're often contested. They're often contested in all the other places you mentioned because of the low level of trust. And I'm afraid that America seems to have been going down that path. I wouldn't be at all surprised if the 2024 elections were even more disputed than the 2020 elections were.
In a recent New York Times column, David Brooks asks his readers to try on a different perspective and to see themselves as the bad guys in the eyes of Trump supporters.
Are we the baddies?
Do you think this is a sign of a remarkable and earth-shattering paradigm shift among the left-wing media, or is a misguided and self-defeating attempt to empathize with those whom they disdain?
More likely it's just moral posturing and virtue signaling. They're trying to make out like they're morally superior. That's what gives them the right to rule the world over the Trump supporters, who they like to characterize as morally inferior. And so they're really just doing more virtue signaling. I don't think anything can really come of that, because the New York Times readers, who are basically the globalist left, who are in charge of much of the world at the moment, they're so utterly convinced of their own moral superiority that I don't think this particular thought exercise is enough to really change anything.
Well, do you think there are any implications for the future of political discourse and satire in America from this column?
I don't think that there'll be any major changes, but I expect that, as I said about the Trump indictment, social cohesion is continuing to disintegrate all over the West, and particularly in America. So I think we're just going to be faced with more of that. We're going to be faced with more distrust, less social cohesion, and really just people becoming more suspicious and paranoid, like you see in places like Brazil.
Well, Roy Morgan's July poll, tracking voting preferences here in New Zealand, showed Labour down to 26%, whereas National is up by 3.5% to 33.5% and looks set to govern. But there's also evidence that some voters are planning to move their support across to the minor parties in the upcoming election. Do these parties differ significantly from the major parties in terms of their policies, values and visions for New Zealand?
I don't believe that the Greens Party differs in such ways significantly from the Labour Party, and I don't believe that the ACT Party differs in such ways significantly from the National Party, because I consider all four of those parties to really be just elements of the globalist establishment. I think in terms of minor parties, I think New Zealand First is significantly different because they take a nationalist perspective, and so they're different from all the globalists. So I think they're significantly different in that ways. The Opportunities Party, as far as minor parties are concerned, I don't think they're really that much different to the Greens. The Opportunities Party really strike me as a Green Party B team, in that the people who couldn't have gotten to the Greens otherwise. And there's also the Maori Party, who could potentially win significant numbers of votes, who are currently a minor party. But it's hard to tell. I think they could win, like New Zealand First. I'm predicting that the Maori Party can win 6, 7, 8% in the election this year. And I think that could potentially lead to significant change.
Vince, how do you explain the surge of support for the right-wing parties in New Zealand and other countries such as Australia, the UK and the US? Is it all driven by the same factors, such as economic hardship, social discontent and political disillusionment? Or are there different dynamics and contexts that shape the political landscape of each country?
No, we're all basically on the same path. It stems ultimately back to the imposition of neoliberalism on all of the Anglo countries in the 1980s. America, Britain, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, we all went down the same path. And so we're all basically one Anglosphere as far as political and economic trends are concerned, because we have the same ruling class essentially. The New Zealand elites, they go overseas to Davos and they hang out with the American elites and the British elites, and they come back and they know what the game plan is, and then they push it on the rest of us. So I think it's still a matter of understanding for most people that left versus right is not really the significant division in politics anymore, because as you see with Labour, who have done almost nothing with their advantage, it's mostly about managerialism as far as they're concerned. So you have a globalist versus nationalist axis, which is now more important, and you have the globalists acting like managers who just want to produce as much yield from the population as possible. And then you have the nationalists who are more like leaders, which I think is why we're going to see a surge of support for Winston Peters this year.
A report in Newswire stated that thousands of Australians are now supporting legalising and taxing cannabis, backing the Greens plan that could rake in $28 billion in revenue over 9 years. How does the Greens model compare to other countries that have already legalised or decriminalised cannabis, such as Canada, Uruguay and Portugal?
The Australian Greens model is very similar to the model that was introduced in Canada. And if I'm not mistaken, the Australian Greens have actually based their proposed laws on the Canadian model. So they want to have legal home grow. You can grow up to 6 plants at home without any legal consequences. If you want to grow more than that, you have to get involved in a cooperative, which I think is like a regional thing. And you can't then grow in residential areas, so you can't grow more than 6 plants, but that's plenty. I mean, that's plenty for most people anyway, if they're not trying to run a business. They want to have cannabis cafes, so similar to the Dutch style, where you can just cruise down and buy some weed to smoke on the premises. They want to also have cannabis cafes that can do takeaways, so that you can buy a product that you can take off the premises. They don't want to have cannabis cafes also selling alcohol. They said they wanted those to be separate things in the public mind. they wanted to restrict advertising, but I thought the best thing was that they wanted to specifically keep the big alcohol and the big pharmaceutical companies out of the cannabis business. So I think the Australian Greens proposal, they've actually looked at all of the various American states and Canada that have introduced some kind of legal policy, and they've tried to take the strengths from all of those policies, the proven strengths based on the evidence of how they've gone, and they've tried to eliminate the weaknesses. I think the Australian Greens proposal is really good.
How would the proposed 15% tax rate on legal cannabis affect the supply and demand of the drug in Australia?
Well, the higher the tax rate, the higher the price, and in theory that should reduce the demand, or at least perhaps push some of the demand onto the black market. What you've seen in some American states, in particular California, and what you've seen in Canada also was that they initially set the taxes too high. So the product was so expensive that many people decided to keep buying off the black market. So I think 15%, that's a nice compromise percentage. If I'm not mistaken, that's less than the percentage on alcohol already. So I think that's quite favourable from the perspective of cannabis users. But the real main thing is to set the tax low enough that the total price of the product is significantly less than the black market. That way you can start taking the market away from the gangs and the other criminals.
In addition to all that excitement, there was also a clever pig running wild in Auckland this last 7 days, sneakily evading capture, sunbathing in a bush, and running on the highway. So, apart from making a spectacle of itself, what do you think it was up to? Protesting against the traffic congestion, or seeking fame and fortune, perhaps?
Probably it was just trying to avoid getting slaughtered, really. It was probably raised somewhere in a backyard in South Auckland and was just making a run for it. I think, probably just the pig is really seems to represent all of us at the moment, just looking for freedom from restrictions and constrictions and government overwatch and control. I think, the story of the pig really resonated with a lot of people this week.
A lot of people. How do you think it managed to outsmart multiple agencies for so long, despite what was called a massive operation to catch it? Do you think it was using GPS, or maybe it had a secret tunnel?
Yeah, well, I think it's mostly just a matter of the fact that it's rural. The pig is in a rural area, and there's a lot of space. There's actually a lot of space where the pig is roaming, and it can easily hide, or it can easily just shoot across a couple of fields if somebody spots it. And I think it just stayed on the run. I think if it was an urban area, if this had been central Auckland, the pig would have been captured much quicker. So I think the rural factor meant it got to have a bit of glory.
Well, let's hope it has a quiet retirement. And that's all we have for you this week. The articles we've referenced will be below in the description, as well as the link to Vince's website. Please remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again next week, same time, same place. But for now, what a week that was, Vince.
Yep, cheers, Bob. Cheers, Internet. It's another crazy week, and tune in again next week.
The Alt Centre are clown world's good guys. They don't fit into boxes neatly enough to be someone else's tools.